Hi, I'm Dan Colby, the Director of Client Technology Value here at Advania UK, and I'm joined by my colleague Dylan today to delve into the subject of how to really get value from AI and Gen AI assistants like Copilot for Microsoft 365.
Yeah, hi there. My name's Dylan Foster Edwards, and I'm responsible for the head of advisory and also the head of sales expertise, which is our pre-sales capability at Advania.
Cool, thanks, Dylan. So where do we start? Perhaps initially talk about how people get exposed to AI and where it comes from. I mean, I think it's easy for us to sit here and think everyone's using it all the time, but in reality, I think there's a whole load of people who still haven't really dipped their toe in the water yet and started to use these kind of tools.
Yeah,
What's your experience of how people get going with it?
I guess people will stumble across it because they have access to it either on the desktop or they'll see a free version of ChatGPT or something, or they'll hear about it in the press, I guess, and they'll just start to play around with it, I think. And I guess the other way is it's organizations are thinking, well, there's a lot about AI going on. We need to start thinking about it, and they start to embark on a formal implementation, especially if they've got a Microsoft estate or a Google estate or whatever. They all come with that capability. So they're thinking, right, well, we've got this capability. How the hell do we start deploying it? How do we start using it? And I guess that most really leads nicely into how we're seeing and how we're supporting our customers to sort of go about that. They come to us and say, "We want to do something about AI. Where do I start? What's the approach?" kind of thing.
And actually, one thing I've seen, there's a bit of a change of approach from Microsoft. Obviously, at Advania, we focus mainly on the Microsoft technology stack. So Copilot is the main Gen AI assistant. And Microsoft's strategy until quite recently was very much land and expand, try to get a few people paying for that Microsoft 365 Copilot license and then build it out further. What they've done quite recently, though, is taken the free version, so it's not entirely free. You need a you need a Microsoft 365 license to qualify for it. But there's now a product called Copilot Chat, which is free to use for those users. But Microsoft will still give you the same organizational enterprise data guarantees around it. So they won't train the model from the data that you share with it. They won't export that data to countries which would breach things like GDPR, etc. But it's free of charge. It's included in the Microsoft 365 license. So what customers can do now is use that tool very broadly to give people a kind of ChatGPT-like experience where they can have a conversation with the AI, they can upload single documents to it, they can generate images, that kind of stuff. But it's a good way, I think, of getting people used to that kind of tool, getting people thinking about how they could leverage that capability in their job. And then for the users who would gain most value from it, you can then give them a paid for license and really supercharge the capability they've got.
I guess that you and I, we've worked on quite a few conversations with customers, and I guess the challenging thing is usually we try and secure funding funds to try and help them do it. There's a minimum requirement, and that means there's a minimum cost, and that usually turns people off, even though that we can quite often secure funding to get them started. So getting that lower entry point, I guess, is really good. But I guess the approach, whether it's Copilot or any other, is historically the same. We start with, I guess, what we would call a bit of a discovery activity to try and understand the business, understand them from a people perspective and departmental perspective, to try and ultimately help them understand whether there is an opportunity to get value from AI. So I know we spend quite a lot of time talking to the business, getting them to tell us about, well, what's your day-to-day life? What do you do in your day? And the one example I always go back to is there's this perception that AI can provide a huge amount of automation, and the one that we quite often get asked about is, well, a PA or an EA of some kind. Surely that's going to make their life fantastic. But we know that use case actually is not that strong, because AI, in that particular for Copilot, only looks at that person's mailbox, not all the people they currently manage. So that in that particular instance, that UK use case is not as strong as we think it is. It can help them on automation, but it can't help automate the things they're managing for other people. So they're the things, I guess, we look to try and pull out an identified use case that drives is in that.
Exactly, yeah. So I think that's technically about to change in terms of the Microsoft roadmap, but you're right. Copilot's a very personal thing in my experience. Everybody works slightly differently. And what you're doing when you give someone a Copilot license is you're asking them to change the way that they work, to change maybe 10, 20, 30 years of muscle memory around how they do their job. And for me, that it's change that's the key to success with any kind of AI, whether it's people change or business process change or even kind of company change to really take advantage of a new opportunity. And yeah, I think you're right, Dylan. That's the approach we tend to take is to get very intimate with the users, to really help them understand the value and the benefit of that change that they can embrace, and to make sure that they are understanding the opportunity and they really are changing their way of working. So, from what from what I've seen over the last year to 18 months, it's that change and adoption approach, as well as some initial training, which really makes a difference between success and failure. Certainly when you're looking at the kind of user-driven Copilot usage, etc.
Yeah, and I guess if you go from that discovery part where you're trying to get a good set of users, and if you go to compete the other side, I guess is what we tend to do is we're ultimately trying to build the momentum to create a business case that will ultimately allow them to deploy it further. So what you're trying to get to is enough evidence and enough support to actually help them create a business case that secures additional funding to go and deploy to 1,000 users from the 100 users that you may have had from a pilot. So that's ultimately what we're doing, and that's why we start with a known set of users and we start with a known outcome that we're trying to achieve. We try and agree how we're going to measure that. So what's good for you, and how do we measure that? So that then when we're trying to put a business case together, we go, well, this is the users we had. This is what we agreed was what you were trying to achieve. This is how we measured it, and here's the results. And sometimes we prove it, sometimes we don't. And I guess that's the textbook approach to make sure that you're going to go through it. You're going to work collaboratively with them. As you say, you're going to make sure you train and support them throughout, because that's really important. Because you won't get the value unless you help them. You can't just deploy them and go, yeah, see you in 3 weeks, and let me know how you get on. That historically will be a massive disaster otherwise.
And it needs to be a continuous change as well, and a permanent change within the way that person's working and the way the organization leverages AI as well, because certainly with something like Copilot, you're paying on a per user per month basis. So if somebody uses it really well for 3 months and then stops, you're no longer getting their value from the license that you're paying for them. So it's very much about instilling that real change in the organization, and that real change into the people that are using these AI tools. I mean, I couldn't get through a single day, I don't think, without using multiple bits of AI in my life now. But a lot of people I don't think have really got into that groove yet to be able to make it part of their day-to-day activities.
Yeah, I guess it's part of that. It's about that change, isn't it? You say, because I personally, when I come to write something, I tend to struggle with a blank piece of paper. But I can usually take something that start and develop it very well. So that's where AI is fantastic for me, because I can give it what I'm trying to do, and it's given me a starter for 10. And then it's quite easy to finesse, but it tends to be historically quite a difficult to start. Or where do I start? Or what's the structure? Yeah. So for that, me personally, that's great. And that's where, as you say, people changing their behaviours and understanding how they use the tool to support what they do personally, because everyone will use it differently. That's really where you start to get the buy-in, and then you get people who regularly use it, like you say you do. I mean, I'm not sure if I use it every day, but I would say most days. It really depends what I'm doing, but some people may only dip in and out once a week, twice a week, because it's for a specific thing they do that's repeatable. So everyone's different, I guess.
And I think that's a really good use case, because the way to really get the value from the investment, I think, is to focus on some use cases that have got real tangible value and have got real impact for the user or for the organization. And when you start the Copilot project and you initially ask the users what are you using it for, 99% of people go, oh, summarizing meetings, or helping me draft and read all these emails I get. They're the bog standard sort of out of the box use cases. But I think when you get into things like performing research, or, as you said, drafting content, or maybe consuming large amounts of content to then repurpose it, that to me is when you get some really strong value there, especially if you then apply that in a way that has a tangible impact for the business. So one thing I do now is, when I'm meeting with customers to understand requirements for a project they might have, I obviously record the meeting and transcribe the meeting, And then, instead of just using the meeting recap, all the meeting recap really does is when I come to write a proposal a week later and I've completely forgotten the conversation, it reminds me of the conversation.
Yeah.
If I use it like that, then I've then still got the whole task of building the proposal and defining for the customer what we're going to do. Whereas what I tend to do instead is take the full transcript and leverage that within Word or maybe Copilot chat to properly understand the requirements. So I'll write a prompt that says something along the lines of, read through this transcript, figure out, I'll give it context. I'll help the AI to understand what the meeting's for, what it's about, who's there, etc. But get it to pull out the real requirements that were discussed by us and the customer, and then to draft the proposal, whether that's a Word document or whether it's a table of requirements which I might drop into a PowerPoint presentation or something. But I think using the AI to really get perhaps 80% of the way to the output is the powerful thing, because I've saved myself a lot of time in that context. Maybe I've able to sell more to more customers, so it has a real tangible impact on the business. Maybe I'm creating something of a higher quality, or it's a bit more inspirational, so the customer's more likely to purchase it, etc. But that, to me, I think is that kind of more evolved and involved use case that is driving value for organizations.
Yeah, I guess two interesting points that you talked about business, and I guess that's one interesting point, because I guess to maximize it, so we tend to engage directly with end users, but end users aren't the ones that are going to be able to create the business case to justify further deployment. So I guess having buy-in from management and leadership in an organization is really key, because unless they're bought in and they understand the value, they're not going to fight for you to secure more funding. So I guess one of the things that is really key for us, and you say that prompting thing, we know from pretty much 99%, if not 100% of the engagements we do, prompting is one of the key things. I can give you an example. I was talking with a customer the other day who was more of a private chat GPT. They wanted us to deploy it specifically to be able to use AI to look at a specific source of data, and they came back and said, it's rubbish, it's not working, not getting the right answers, and it was all only because they weren't prompting it properly. We sent one of our change adoption people in, spent some time with them, tried to understand what they're doing, helped them structure that prompt, and now they're getting some decent results. So it's quite easy to fix. Then once you're used to doing it and structuring in that way, then you can quite quickly get some better results from it. And then, as you say, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And then also saving them, because once you find a really cool prompt, you think, oh, I'll remember that one, and you share it with other people, and then because you'll reuse it. Because weirdly, you've only got to tweak that prompt very slightly, and you can get a slightly different answer just by changing a few words around the way it interprets it. So yeah, that's really key. Is it worth talking a bit about, we've talked about maybe what people might perceive as the more traditional AI kind of stuff. Is it worth talking a bit more about some of the newer? I know you've been doing quite a bit of stuff in sort of the agentic stuff, or agent-based stuff. That's really starting to come in. And I know specifically in Copilot, that's now sort of almost given. If you compare to what you used to do with the likes of your Copilot Studio, now you've got that native capability in it. So is it worth just covering off some of that?
Yeah, definitely. Because I think, this is the real paradigm shift that businesses are going to see in terms of value. Obviously, it's great being able to make people a bit more efficient and people a bit more creative in what they're doing. But the way to really drive automation and value within a business is to take some of those processes out of the hands of people, and allow them to be done far more quickly and far more efficiently, etc. And there is a difference though between if you look at the history of AI and how things have evolved. I think for the last 5 to 10 years or so, quite a few businesses have made use of what was called robotic process automation. But the key word there is robotic. It only really worked on a very, very well-defined, very repeatable process. Whereas obviously what we've seen with generative AI and with assistants like Copilot is it's much more intelligent, for want of a better word, than that. It doesn't have to be one specific process. It's got human-like understanding of language, and it can think for itself in a much more flexible way. So I think when we take that capability of that generative AI and then turn it into agents who can act on behalf of a user or can act independently of a user, that's when we can get some really strong value. Now, the agentic capability within Copilot is still relatively new. There's not many customers have really explored it yet, but I think we're on the precipice of a real wave of opportunity for businesses to leverage this stuff. Whether you can have a number of different types of agent within Copilot that can do things like reason over specific sets of data, so that you're getting much more higher fidelity answers from Copilot for a question you're asking, or you can build something which runs a process entirely by itself, or from a trigger in another system. So you might have a trigger that is new person joins and records created in the HR system. That might trigger a Copilot agent to go and run all of the IT onboarding process, for example, and set up their accounts in Microsoft 365 and buy them a laptop and ship it to their home address and all these kind of things. That kind of really autonomous behavior, but in a scenario where it's not following an absolute script. It's able to be creative and perhaps think around different options within the process. So, that's where I can see, as I said, not many customers have really started to embrace that yet, and I think it's a much bigger thing to consider in terms of governance and process design, etc., than just giving Copilot to a user. But I think that's where real value is going to come from.
Yeah, but what about, I guess, the risk that comes with that, though? I guess we're both grey-haired. We know how hard it was to get stuff built before, and the example I always use that when Power Apps were created, the proliferation of Power Apps created because it was citizen developer, they're really easy to deploy, and next minute it's gone out of control. CIO's going crazy because there's loads of stuff being developed. He's not buying an off-the-shelf product anymore. I guess if you're giving this power of agent-based deployment to an end user and you make it really easy for them to do, I guess governance is going to start to become a bit of a challenge because it's going to proliferate, going to get out of control. I guess I know we have seen that. We've been deploying some of our people to customers where they've been playing like in Power Apps or Power BI, and suddenly they've got out of control. I guess does the agents suffer from the same problem?
Yeah, I think even more so probably, because something like Teams usage or Power Platform, as you say, they're still being controlled by a user, whereas with Copilot agents, you can create an agent which acts entirely on its own. And so I think for those customers who are a bit more forward thinking and they're getting into that space, putting in place good governance process for themselves, or there's actually quite a number of AI governance platforms which are now becoming available where you can use them to monitor things like spend, you could use them to monitor behavior, you could use them to monitor accuracy of these agents when they're doing the job, which otherwise might not be monitored by anybody. So yeah, I think it's a hurdle that people can overcome, but I think that's definitely, it takes a lot more consideration before you start to build agents than it does before. If you're just using Copilot, the main consideration for Copilot is, have I got my document sharing and permissioning nicely nailed down so that people aren't being given information they don't have access to or shouldn't have access to? If you're then moving to a world where you're creating real autonomy through the agents, then it takes a lot more consideration. But as you say, that's something we are helping customers with, and we've done so in the past around things like Teams and Power Platform, and we'll continue to do so with Copilot.
And I think the only other thing I can think of on the sort of list of things we wanted to talk about was around, we're about trying to get value out of AI. So how best do we track and measure that? And I know if we go back to a Copilot example, there's some tools there. There's a Copilot dashboard we can look at. We can look at what the adoption are. We can look at what apps people are using. That gives us some pretty good insight into what it is, rather than just asking people or looking to who replies to emails. That's some hard data. I guess that's still key to prove that what you're doing, because the last thing you want to do is spend a ton of money deploying something and then find that no one uses it, I guess. So is there any tips and tricks really about making sure you're tracking that continually to make sure you are getting the value?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few reports that Microsoft provide that show some of that usage volume. As you say, in particular, I think with Copilot, if a user's not using it at all, then they're definitely not getting value from it. When a user is using it, it becomes slightly ambivalent as to exactly the value they're getting from it. And the approach we take is to both measure through the system, but also get more qualitative answers from the user around the benefit they're seeing and the time they're saving. But I think when it comes to making a really robust business case, what's very important is that not only are you using Copilot generally to make things better, but you're using Copilot specifically on business processes which have a direct impact. So, maybe something like an RFP response, for example. If you can respond to 10% more RFPs or 20% more RFPs by using Copilot or by using some other AI tool, then you're going to win more business. It's a law of that kind of volume of activity. So focusing in on some of those use cases that have real tangible benefit for the business is very important, I think, because whilst the intangible benefits are important as well, they often don't stack up to make a business case for what could be quite a large investment.
Yeah, and I guess we also know that the model's evolving every day or every minute. So what it could do today, it can do some more tomorrow. So it's continually learning, it's continually evolving. So it's I guess the power of it is growing day by day. The more and more gets used.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. But the moral is you have to be in it to win it. So I think for people that are saying I'm going to sit around and wait to see what it evolves into, that's not a good approach. I think getting in there, leveraging the AI, getting users used to changing the way they work is really important now. And then as the value increases and increases, you'll get to see that and realize that. Whereas if you're hanging around on the sidelines, then you're not going to be part of that opportunity.
Cool. Totally agree. Okay, well, I think
Great.
that's probably a good place to finish then, really. I think good chat today. And
So,
let's see what the next chat's all about.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Dylan.
Right. Cheers, Dan. Take care. See you later.